All right, so we are recording. If you don't want, the only recording is of the screen I'm sharing, so your faces will not be visible. But again, thank you all for taking time to spend some time with me this morning, whether you're watching it live or watching the replay. I hope you find it valuable. This is a topic that I'm very, very passionate about. If you guys follow my social media content at all, you know that I love to kind of talk diet culture and the myths and kind of how to get away from it, really. For those of you who aren't familiar with me, my name's Erin. I'm a registered dietitian. I am based in Kentucky, but I'm trying to build my social media platform. I'm trying to build a virtual business, and kind of as part of that is just kind of getting my message out there, right? And a big part of that, my goal in life and in my profession is just to help people feel good in their bodies, right? That sometimes means changing the body that they're in, and that is okay. It's okay to want to lose weight. It's okay to want to change your body, but it also can mean kind of learning to accept your body for what it's capable of doing, and kind of learning to love the body that you are in. But my goal is that I want people to feel good in their bodies. I think a lot of times people kind of assume that dietitians are judgmental or we're the food police or things like that, and nothing could be farther from the truth, at least not for this dietitian, right? So I think that my goal is to kind of undo some of that stereotyping, and one of the things that makes it hard to accomplish this mission, right, of helping people feel better in their bodies is diet culture. We're going to talk a lot about what diet culture is, what it means, how it presents itself, and kind of just how pervasive it can be, which is why it's a topic I am so passionate about. But let's see, we'll go ahead and skip to the slide. Next slide. So first of all, you all are seeing that screen, right? Like the big slide screen, correct? Okay, good. So just a couple of housekeeping things. I mentioned to some of you that came on earlier, I mute everybody just because otherwise we get weird background noises and things like that. But if you guys have questions as we get going, by all means, unmute yourself, ask a question. You can interrupt me, I don't care. Or there's also the chat option. So at the bottom of your screen, there should be a chat. I feel like we're all pretty used to Zoom at this point in time and know how it works. But you can always kind of type a question in the chat. By all means, don't feel like you're interrupting my flow or anything like that. This is very dynamic and interactive as much as we can make it. So, and then if you're watching this on replay, obviously you can't ask questions directly, but that's okay. So I have all of my contact information right there. So my email, my Instagram, my TikTok, which sometimes messaging people on TikTok can be a little bit weird, but I will respond. If I get the message, I will respond. And then of course I would love feedback. Like I said earlier, I would love to hear kind of, how you felt about the sign-on process, the topics that we covered, the depth of the information, and then of course, even little things like the time and the day and things like that. What works well for you and what doesn't. Okay. So also as a thank you for being here, I will give you, this is for the people who are attending live. So this is, unfortunately, if you're watching this on replay, this doesn't apply to you. But for the folks attending live, you'll get a free copy of my 2022 planning guide if you don't already have it. Obviously, it's a free resource. It's been up there for a little bit, but I will be sending that out to you in the next couple of days. And then you also get a free 30-minute counseling session. Now, some of you are current clients, and that's great. We'll basically just apply it as a follow-up visit or something like that. But it gives you kind of, we'll make the money work out, but basically it gives you an option to kind of access my sessions, kind of what it feels like to work one-on-one with me if that's something you're interested in, for free. So definitely take advantage of that. That will be, oh, whoops, I thought I had another slide of kind of what it would look like, but that's okay. It'll be on my website, and you will get an email with the replay that tells you how to go in and sign up for that. So what are we talking about today? So by the end of this webinar, my goal is so we're talking largely about these disordered eating patterns, right? So we're talking about the ways in which diet culture essentially lies to us and tells us that that nutrition is more complicated than it actually is, right? Good nutrition does not have to be complicated, but you know, diet culture makes money off of telling you that there's a right way and a wrong way to do things. So we'll kind of talk about some of those disordered patterns that can evolve from that. We're also going to talk about some strategies to kind of heal your relationship with food. So, you know, if you're anything like me and your relationship with food has been somewhat checkered in the past, then it can be kind of hard, right? Like, even if you accomplish the first step of recognizing the disordered patterns and recognizing the lies of diet culture, it can be hard, right? Like, how do okay, I know that this is not great, but how do I go from here? Obviously, that takes a lot of work and it can take a lot of depth, right? And I want to be explicitly clear and provide a disclaimer here that, you know, I'm not a licensed therapist. We will not in this session, you know, be able to kind of completely unpack everything that diet culture has done to impact you as an individual. That said, I will be giving you some pointers. And you know, if you have more questions or you're kind of more concerned about yourself or about somebody else, by all means, let me know. I may or may not be the right resource for you, but I'm also more than happy to connect you with other resources that may be more appropriate depending on the situation. And that said too, you know, we will be getting into a little bit of heavy stuff, kind of talking about like eating disorders and things of that nature. If that is not stuff that is comfortable for you to absorb, then by all means, you know, feel free to click this off, right? You and your health and your mental health come first. So by all means, if it's getting tense for you and you need to take a break, that's okay too. And then we'll also talk just a little bit. This is where I kind of really shine, right? Is these practical tips for healthy eating patterns. So recognize the disorder, start talking about healing their relationship, which is a huge part of getting to a better place, and then kind of some practical tips for building healthy habits. Okay. As I said earlier, kind of a little bit about me and why this is important to me is, you know, I empower people to break this cycle of dieting. So we break free from these disordered patterns of thinking there's a right and a wrong, and feeling like, you know, that we have to go to these extremes to find the body and the health that we want. You don't. A lot of that messaging comes from diet culture. So if you're not already aware, diet culture is kind of this system of beliefs that values weight, shape, and size over overall health and well-being. I'm going to say that again. So diet culture is a system of beliefs that values weight, shape, and size over health and well-being. So very, very often in our culture, the narrative is that your shape and your size are reflective of your health. And that is in fact not true. I did a whole webinar series on basically just that back in January, but basically your health is not, you know, your weight very much has very little to do with your health. And it's not predictive, it's not indicative, it's nothing. It's just your weight and your size are affected by so many other factors. So to that end, you know, that's why we're here, right? So how do we unpack it? Because that's where a lot of these narratives of, well, there's a right and a wrong, or you have to go to these extremes, that's where they come from. A little bit about why this matters to me personally, and some of you probably already know this, so I'm sorry if I'm going through it again. But I'm a survivor of diet culture. So if you don't know or haven't, you know, picked up on it from my content, I am somebody who is in recovery from an eating disorder, and honestly, a lot of my history kind of growing up was very riddled with diet culture. And a lot of that came from my mom, who, you know, well-intended, but, you know, her background was riddled with diet culture as well. So I survived and kind of came out of the other side. And now it's my mission to to take it down. A little bit of how that manifested for me personally. I was 5 when I remember very vividly sitting in kindergarten, and we like sat crisscross applesauce and I saw like kind of when my thighs squished together, you know, that little like, you know, chunk that like kind of sits together, I noticed that like mine was thicker than other people's. And like I vividly remember thinking, why are my thighs so big? And that's kind of, and that was 5, right? Like I should not have been worrying about how big my thighs are, but I knew enough that I know that my thighs were bigger, number one, but two, that for some reason was bad. And I think that's the key part of this, right? Like, it's obviously you're going to notice different shapes and sizes, but like that the thicker thighs were in somehow a bad thing. And that was, that's something I was taught even at such a young age. Obviously, body image issues got way worse as life went on. Like I said, my mom would constantly comment on her body and her size. Eventually, it became like my body and my size as well. And there's just kind of this morality placed on being thin over this is being overweight. And still to this day, my mom is in her 70s, and it makes me sad because she's gaining weight as she's getting older, because that's normal. That's what bodies do when they get older. However, to her, it is somehow a reflective of the fact that she's doing something wrong. And we've talked about it. I've tried. It's just kind of one of those things that you kind of just have to let it go. But to that end, there's this real, and I kind of ask her sometimes. I'll challenge her. I'll be like, okay, well, so what? You're getting larger, so what? Your pants don't fit, so what? Buy other pants. And she's like, well, like, and it's just like, it's short circuits, right? It's like some reason like being large is not okay. And it's just kind of, why? There isn't a good reason why, it's just not. As a teenager, I barely fit in the largest size. So kind of, continued, messages to me that somehow my body was too large and wrong, right? Because they didn't make pants that were large enough for me. So kind of, in this, in this section, it's kind of, I want to talk a lot about kind of, that story. I feel like is a story that people in some level can relate to, right? It may be a little bit different for you, but to some extent, somehow most of us have been told in some way, and it may not be because your body is large, right? It may also be because your body is too thin, or it's not really too thin, but like compared to what society considers normal, it's too thin. So I think, most of us in some way have been told that our body is not okay, right? For whatever reason. Otherwise you probably wouldn't be on this webinar, right? So kind of what is the message, right? What is the message of that, other than like just like thinness is the ideal? It goes deeper, right? The message is that you can and you should be able to control your own body weight. And we'll get into lots of reasons why that really isn't the case. That larger bodies are in some way less worthy, right? And I think that one really hits hard. It hits hard for me because I was a little bit larger as a kid, but I think it hits hard for a lot of people, even my mom included. She's feeling like this larger body that she is now living in is somehow inherently less worthy. And honestly, that breaks my heart. Like, I've gotten to a place where I'm healthy enough to where it doesn't like bother me directly, but it breaks my heart that she feels that way. And I know a lot of other people do feel that way, and it breaks my heart for them too. Weight gain or obesity are the result of poor eating and habits or laziness, right? I think a lot of people, particularly when you go to the doctor, definitely when you kind of you hear friends and family kind of talking about weight management, being able to control your body weight is honestly a myth. And that's not to say that you can't change from where you are currently, but like, if you are somebody like me, like I weigh about 200 pounds now. I don't mind to tell you all that. Like, I'm never going to weigh 120. I'm never going to weigh 130. Like, I don't feel good at that weight, right? Even though that's what society wants me to weigh. I may be able to lose, 10 or 15 pounds, just kind of like depending on what I do, but and then I don't want to, but it's not that you can't change it at all. But the fact is that like your genetics and other factors are going to drive your body weight, not just how you act or what you eat. So I just want to be kind of clear about that. And then of course, it also teaches us that going to extremes for the sake of weight loss is okay. And that's really where I want to hone in here, right? Is that, it values this thin ideal over just about everything else, right? So it's kind of like, oh, well, it's okay that you're only eating 500 calories a day because you're losing weight. That's great. And I have had, again, like the medical community, and as somebody who's part of the medical community, it's really unfortunate But I've often seen doctors praise patients for full on eating disorder, like it is clear as day that that is an eating disorder and it's problematic, yet they're praising the patient because they're losing weight. And that drives me up the wall. And believe you me, I call it out every time I see it, but I can't catch them all. So it's a very, very common experience. And then, kind of the ultimate message, right, is that if your body is not thin, and I would, go farther to say that this is deeper than just thinness. It's also whiteness. It's also transgendered. So I think that there is a lot of shame surrounding, definitely around trans people, obviously around queer people, also around like women of color in particular. But there's this, the thin white cis ideal is kind of that ideal. And I think it's deeper than just the thinness component of it. And there's a lot to that, right? Because all bodies are worthy. You don't have to do anything to earn that. But because you don't fit the norm, for some reason, you are less than. And I think that's a very much a part of diet culture and the marketing that surrounds it as well. So, and kind of ultimately the message, we play this blame and shame game, right? Is that like, if you don't live in a thin body, you don't get to have cute clothes, you don't get to find a romantic partner, right? Like, how many stories or movies have we seen of like somebody who loses weight and then all of a sudden they're like super confident and then like they find this like super hunky guy or whatever, and it's just like, that's not the that's not the narrative, right? Like, you can be confident in any size. Sit comfortably on public transportation. I mean, this is one that I hear a lot. I mean, again, I weigh about 200 pounds. I'm a fairly normal sized person, but like trying to sit on some airplane seats, it's like, what, and a lot of times people like have to get like extra extender belts and things like that. Like, it's just not built for people in larger bodies, with the message, of course, then being, well, make your body fit our transportation, not let's adjust our transportation to your body, right? Be respected by the medical community. This is a huge one, right? And there's data on data on data of this one, where fat people in particular, that's the data I'm talking about, are regarded, not with the same level of care and expertise as thinner people. So you can have people, a fat person and a skinny person present to the same doctor with the same symptoms. The skinny person is going to get labs, x-rays, kind of whatever kind of typical diagnostic criteria. And the fat person is more than likely going to be told to lose weight. And that's probably why they're having the problem. And that's very frustrating for a lot of reasons. But it actually then kind of increases these poor outcomes in fatter people, which then skews the data and fits the narrative of this weight affects your health, right? Well, maybe it's not the weight that's affecting your health. Maybe it's the fact that fat people aren't treated the same way, don't get the same, interventions that thin people do. And maybe that's what's affecting their health, not the fact that they're just overweight, if that makes sense. So again, take all of that kind of, statistical data with a grain of salt. And also, like, getting to eat and enjoy socially, right? If you're somebody who's ever lived in a larger body, whether it is real or not, it's real to you, that feeling like, you cannot, or should not be eating certain things, right? That feels judgmental. So whenever you are socializing, you feel like everybody's kind of scrutinizing your plate or scrutinizing how much you're eating. And a lot of times people will actually say stuff to you, right? So that's kind of a big part of this as well. That is just account, again, this narrative that you are not good enough. I'm going to pause here just because I see something in the Katie's saying in the chat that we prescribe to fat folks the behaviors we diagnose as disordered in thin folks. Yeah, hugely, right? So again, a fat person and a skinny person present to the doctor key, and I've physically seen this happen, where like, let's say like they come in and saying, I'm eating 300 calories a day, I'm shaky, I'm weak, I'm tired all the time. The fat person's going to be told, well, it's probably because you're overweight. The skinny person's going to be told, let's run some laps, right? And it's not okay at all. But It's scary, really. So I want to kind of pause here for a second and just kind of, let you all kind of think, you know, where you are in life, right? And you can share this in the chat if you're comfortable. You're more than welcome to unmute yourself and share if you're comfortable. But kind of how has diet culture impacted you directly? I shared with my story and gave you some kind of prime examples, but like kind of get your brains kind of flowing. And obviously, if you're watching this on the replay, just kind of jot down some notes. You don't have to share it with us if you don't want to, but I'm going to give you all kind of just a minute to kind of reflect, what kinds of ways has diet culture impacted you? Um, and keep in mind the impacts can be, somewhat of a benefit, right? Like if you live in a thin body, you'd be like, oh wow, like I never thought about the fact that like I can comfortably sit on airplanes and don't have to think about it, right? Like it can be a positive thing. Um, but kind of, just think back on maybe some impacts you've had. I'm gonna shut this door so all my fur babies don't wander in. And if you're comfortable sharing in the chat, by all means go for it. But I just want to kind of give pause to let you reflect on it. Ooh, Katie, I love it. So yes, I know that you've also come from an eating disorder past, and yeah, like one of these things, everybody thinks like once you get into recovery with your eating disorder, that like the thoughts go away. They don't. You just learn how to deal with them better. And I think I shared on my TikTok page, I kind of shared this. I shared it as a win, but I think that this is kind of a common thought process is that, I was sick for about a week and I was down. And I wasn't able to go to the gym. And, my brain still kind of had that thought pattern of like, well, you're not going to the gym, you're going to get fat. And like I was able to then talk back to myself and be like, no, we don't talk like that anymore about ourselves, right? But the thought was still there, and it's really ingrained in you. So yeah, certainly things like that. And I promise that this isn't just like a doom and gloom of like how diet culture has fucked us all up. It's more of this is setting the stage, right? And I promise there is a hopeful message at the end. So bear with me. Yeah, exactly, Katie. And I think, and if you guys don't know Katie's a personal trainer. She's awesome. Katie, you're actually on one of my slides towards the end. I don't know that you do that, but yeah, there she is. But yeah, like you have to like actively like tell yourself, that that's wrong. And unfortunately, there's not enough messaging out there, right? Like it can be very easy to go down that rabbit hole without the proper support. And that's definitely something we're going to talk about in a little bit. But anyway, now back to our slides. So what things that this has told us are normal, right? It has told us that restriction is normal, and it has told us that compensation are normal. And kind of just for the sake of this talk, I'm going to define restriction as like the limitation or control of someone or something. For the most part throughout this talk, we're going to be talking about that something being food. But I mean, that's, just the definition of restriction. And then compensation is basically an act to offset something that was presumably an error, right? It doesn't like the hard definition of compensation doesn't have to be an error, but in terms of this, we're talking about something that basically you are compensating for something you feel like you did wrong. Oh, Jackie, did I miss a comment? There we go. So many ways. Being ashamed to eat in public. Yeah, that's a huge one for so many people. Sorry, Jackie, I missed your point. And Katie, thank you for pointing out that I missed it. But yeah, so this is back to the last slide. But so Jackie is saying, definitely being ashamed to eat in public, and going to the doctor, right? Like people have serious, I mean, not that anybody loves going to the doctor, right? Like, let's be clear, like there's needles, they're going to poke you in places you don't want to be poked. There may be some uncomfortable conversations, but I think for heavier people, it takes on a whole new level of anxiety. Like I had a friend that had to take beta blockers before she could go to the doctor, which makes you wonder, like they're measuring your blood pressure and she's on beta blockers, which do lower your blood pressure. But like otherwise she couldn't get in the door, and it's awful just because she was so mistreated. And it breaks my heart to see that, because as somebody, I didn't take the same oaths as doctors, but like I went into the career for the same reasons. And it's like, I want to help people. I want to help people feel better. And that means literally meeting people where they are and helping them feel better. Whether that is changing their mindset, whether it's changing their eating, whether it's changing, in their case, like medications, that's fine. But the goal is to help people feel better about themselves, not make them feel worse. But doctors don't know that sometimes. Yeah, having everything blamed on their weight. If you just lose weight, make your symptoms go away. Yeah. And like that's how things get missed, right? Very often. That's how a lot of things get missed. So we'll definitely talk about that for sure. And yeah, definitely like eating in public, right? Like and like honestly, like even I don't know that you necessarily have to be overweight to feel that level of shame, because like I don't know. I tell everybody I'm a human garbage disposal, and like I eat more than my husband regularly, and that doesn't bother me, and it doesn't bother him, but it bothers other people. Like people comment on it, and it's just like, bro, I could eat a rugby team under the table. Like I just like to eat, and I think it's just kind of there's this expectation that girls are supposed to be like thin and dainty and like whatever. It's just like, no, I eat like a pig. And like I love food and I get excited about it, and that's why I went into a career where all I talk about is food all day long. Like, get off of me. So I definitely, but I have like felt self-conscious in public at times before, not to invalidate your claim too, Jackie, but it's just, yeah, it's super frustrating. Just like, why can't we just let people be, right? Like, let them be. Like, if they're eating ice cream, let them eat ice cream, and like, let them fucking enjoy it. It's ice cream. It's delicious. You know it's delicious. If you're telling me it's not delicious, you're lying. So anyway, but basically this leads us to believe that things like compensation and restriction are normal when in fact they are not. And I'll kind of walk you through some prime examples as to what I'm talking about. So restriction, that can look like a lot of things, right? It can look like demonizing certain foods, such as like, junk food, like Oreos, sweets, fast food, processed. And I love this one, processed food. It just drives me nuts because like there isn't a definition of processed food. There's no like level of processing that makes food good or bad. But like people like to throw that term around. So that, label things as like junk food or kind of unhealthy foods. When the reality is like, even though there's of course different nutrient contents to our foods, like obviously, right? Like carrots are going to have a different nutrient profile than cupcakes, but that doesn't mean that one's good or bad morally, right? Let's see. Whoops. Let's see. And then in other ways we restrict foods, we say that like certain foods cause weight loss or weight gain, things like that. And carbs are kind of the poster child for this, right? Carbs, at least in the last couple of decades, have basically taken the brunt of like, carbs are bad for you, they cause weight gain. That's not true, but that's what diet culture has told us. But it's also kind of this nuanced thing. I don't know if anybody else gets these things that fly through their social media feed of like, like top 5 foods to avoid eating if you want to avoid belly bloat, or top 5 foods to eat if you want to reduce your belly bloat or whatever. And like, truthfully, food does not have that power, right? Like if your belly is bloated, we're probably dealing with a food intolerance or different hormonal issues or whatever. But there's no one food group that's going to make that more or less likely. And then another key example is that like you shouldn't be hungry, right? You shouldn't be hungry after, if you ate, an hour ago, well, I shouldn't be hungry yet. That's kind of a more benign think of it, but it can also be into like, well, It's after 8 o'clock, I shouldn't be hungry or I shouldn't be eating, or it's not yet 12 o'clock, so I shouldn't be hungry or I shouldn't be eating, those kinds of things. If you're hungry, you're hungry. It doesn't matter when you last ate. Maybe you didn't eat enough. Maybe you didn't eat enough balance. There could be a lot of different reasons to that. But the point is, if you're hungry, it's okay to be hungry. But we kind of have these like societal norms that restrict when we eat. And honestly, it comes from, if you think back to even when we were in school, right? Like you had breakfast maybe before you went to school, then you maybe had a mid-morning snack, then you had lunch, and then you basically went the entire rest of the day until, maybe you had a snack after school, maybe you didn't, and then you had dinner, right? But like it's kind of like that pattern of eating is what, one, you were actually physically restricted to, but two, you were kind of taught that that's normal. And that's, again, at a very young age. Let's see. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize that that had a separate thing. And then again, like don't eat after a certain amount of time. Let's see. Da-da-da-da-da. I see a couple of comments. I'm going to pause for a minute and read.
We're just chatting, Erin.
That's
It's all good.
okay.
we're just hanging out.
That's fine. I'll let you all chat. Yeah. Yeah, I hate it when my FYP. Oh my god! Like sometimes, like I can't. Like there's times, and like I know it's an algorithm, right? So like I just like scroll super fast, but it's like, oh god, it's so frustrating. Like me, like stop with this bullshit. Like what I post and what I don't. Um, but it's still, I don't know. Like, mm, 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 mm. Although I will say that anecdotally, most of my TikTok feed has been about like the Snoop Dogg being at like the Super Bowl halftime show and just kind of all of the jokes surrounding like 90 babies like myself, like how we're so excited for it. So that's actually been a bit refreshing. Anyway, on to compensation. So kind of just some examples of this. It's a little less complicated, a little less intricate. A lot of it is centered around this dialogue of you have to either like work out a certain amount to like earn your food, or you have to work out a certain amount to burn off your food. And I think that kind of things like calorie trackers and watches, unintentionally, right? I don't think this is the intention when anybody created these things, but I think honestly, for a lot of people, that the watches and kind of the like real-time data has actually made that a little bit worse, because it kind of sends this message that we should be able to monitor it honestly more precisely than we can. Unfortunately, the watches and things like that are not always super accurate. And even monitoring intake, I mean, as somebody who, we have pretty high stakes calorie counts in like hospitals and things like that, and it's still not super accurate. So the idea that things like MyFitnessPal and things like that, you're going to be able to super accurately measure it. You're really not always quantifying it. Your goal for the week, Jackie, is to take a break from your hour, because I caught myself falling into that habit. Yeah, for sure. And there was a time where I couldn't be trusted with, having MyFitnessPal on my phone or having a watch. I've frequently will like kind of take breaks from it. I do like that it reminds me to stand up once an hour. I think that is really helpful. But I think it can be very easy to kind of slip into this mentality of like, well, I have it in my calorie goals for the day. Okay. Like, have you moved today? Like, have you taken like, I like the idea of standing up once an hour. I think that that's something most of us could benefit from. And I personally am something like, I will respond to a buzz on my wrist rather than like looking at the time and saying like, oh, it's time to stand up. But that's really about it, right? Like I think a lot of times people like I know people who will like walk up and down the hallway to like get their steps in and things like that. Like when the Fitbits first came out and like the 10,000 steps was the goal, it's kind of like, that's not really what the research said, right? Like the research just said that people who move more and sit less tend to have better circulation and cardiac output. Like that's not, and that's about it, right? Like walking up and down your hallway 5 or 6 times to get to this magical number, frankly, doesn't make a difference. But again, it's kind of this narrative of like, there's a right way to do it. You have to do 10,000 steps. You have to get 8 hours of sleep. You have to get, you have to burn so many calories with movement, that kind of thing. It can definitely be Yeah, and exactly, Katie, you're exactly right. I imagine there's other benefits of movement other than weight loss, right? Yeah, because I mean, exactly, when the big kind of Fitbit study came out, it wasn't about weight loss at all. It had nothing to do with weight loss. It's just kind of like metabolically, these people were healthier, and it has more to do with how people live their lives overall than the actual 10,000 steps, right? Like you cannot realistically, and I think this is something, it's a little bit off topic, but we'll talk about it. Whenever you are kind of hearing claims from nutrition research or really any health research, kind of consider the source, because people live their lives very differently and there's a lot of factors that go into it, and it is very difficult to isolate one factor and control for all of the other variables, right? In humans anyway, like in mice and in rats, obviously they're all living in the same cages in the same room, but that also kind of is part of the problem with those kinds of studies, right? Is that like humans aren't rats and mice and you can't control for all these other factors. So when um, I listened to a really good podcast the other day about sleep, and it's just kind of like, yeah, you can't really say that people who sleep for 5 hours or more are less healthy than people who sleep for 8 hours or more, because like you don't know why. You don't know, maybe the person who sleeps for 5 hours or less has cancer and is in pain, and like that's why they're not doing well, as opposed to, and it can be the flip side too, like the person who sleeps more than 8 hours, like they may be really depressed, right? And that's why they're sleeping so much, and that's not a healthy thing. So always be careful when you're listening or hearing research. um, Another kind of, and this one kind of falls into restriction too, but cleanses, fasts, detoxes. Oh God, I can't even wait until like tomorrow when everybody's like, oh, I'm doing like XYZ juice cleanse to like make up for all the Super Bowl snacks. And it's just like, just eat your snacks and move on. Like it's not the end of the world. Um, just make sure that you're getting back to balance. But we have these normalized products that are sold, right, as like, oh, just do this juice cleanse and it'll jumpstart your weight loss, or whatever. And it's just like, none of that is good for your body, none of that is serving you well. But it's normalized. Focusing on the calorie burn of workouts, which I think we basically already touched on that already with some of our discussion. But the watches and things like that can be somewhat problematic for that. And then even like restriction. So restriction, I think this is kind of a good point. Restriction can be a form of compensation, right? And that's kind of where the juice cleanses, the fast, and things like that come in. But I know it doesn't have to be that severe, right? It can also be, well, I overdid it this weekend, so I'm going to be really good throughout the week, right? To kind of make up for that bad. And if you can't see me, I'm doing air quotes like crazy here, but we're making up for choices that frankly weren't that destructive, right? Like you ate food is more than likely what you did. Maybe you drank alcohol too, but fasting or kind of eating salads all week isn't going to compensate for that. But again, these are things that we think are normal. So kind of bring it all home. This isn't normal, right? If you haven't gotten that that message so far, then I don't know what to tell you, but it's just what we're used to, right? It's what we're used to, and it's what a lot of us unfortunately still are surrounded by. So how do we change it, right? And now that I've painted this like whole super like doom and gloom picture, right? I have about 15 minutes to kind of tell you how we can fix it. And obviously this is a huge conversation and involves a lot of layers and a lot of factors. We're not going to be able to solve it in an hour. But what are some steps that you personally can take to help kind of reduce the impact of this in your life, right? Change what you consume. So this is a really, really big one, and I apologize. This is somewhat of a text dense slide, but either get rid of or limit your interaction with toxic diet culture, media, and individuals. So I mentioned my mom earlier in this conversation, and obviously she's my mom. I don't want to like necessarily cut off my relationship with her, but to protect my mental health, we've definitely had to set boundaries. and sometimes that can be uncomfortable. Sometimes for some people, it's more of a limiting your interaction with that person while not necessarily cutting them out of your life, and then kind of bolstering yourself up before you interact with that person, and also supporting yourself after you interact with that person. But one thing we do have complete control over is our social media accounts that we follow and don't follow. And I always tell people, obviously I try to send a very positive message regarding nutrition and diet and body image and things like that. That said, I also acknowledge that my content may not be safe for everyone to consume. It may be triggering for somebody who's in the throes of an eating disorder, or it just may be too prominent for somebody who's trying to recover, and that's okay, right? I will never ever take offense to somebody who unfollows me to protect their own mental health. Oh, Body Kindness. I have heard of that book. I actually haven't read it. That is a great book. But I've heard good things about it. I've heard it from other intuitive eating dietitians. So I have not yet read it, but I'm writing it down right now because like somebody else mentioned it to me, and it was one of those like, what was that book that they mentioned? But I love it. Yeah, because a lot of what I do is a lot of times people come to me, they're like, what resources can I use? And as you can see, I've got books and things like that to list, but we'll add Body Kindness to the list. Obviously, other things that you consume, so podcasts, movies, TV shows, some of that, like obviously, like you don't always know what you're getting yourself into, but you can stop watching a show if you think that it's getting to like, that's diet culture-y. And kind of movies like, I don't know, Shallow Hal and things like that, like what it's going to be about. So it's like if it's annoying, then don't watch it. So kind of limit the negative interactions to the best of your ability, but then also increase your interaction with body positive and body neutral folks. Quick note, body positive and body neutral are slightly different, but I feel like a lot of times people kind of get them confused. Body positive is this mentality of no matter what your body looks like, no matter how it feels, like you should love it no matter what. And I will say that the thing I like about body positivity is one, that it is kind of the first antithesis or the first clapback, if you will, to diet culture. So I like that. It kind of set the stage. It also does push this message of all bodies are worthy of love. And I think that is something that's very important. Body neutrality is a little bit of an offshoot of that. It's more of respecting your body for what it can do. So kind of a key example is to like, if you are somebody who like maybe your stomach is larger than you would like for it to be. Body positivity would tell you that like, oh, you just have to do affirmations every day to your stomach and say, oh, I love you. You're such a wonderful stomach. Whereas body neutrality is more of a like, that's a human stomach. That's all it is. It digests food. It's good to me. But like other than that, it's just a human stomach. So it's kind of that positive versus neutral messaging. I don't necessarily, and like, the thing about body neutrality is that it's a little bit, I think, especially people who are struggling with an eating disorder or are dealing with body image issues, I feel like very often the body neutrality is much more accessible, and it's much more doable for people, because the reality is you're not going to love everything about your body. Like you could have kind of like the picture perfect body and you may or may not love everything about it. And that's totally fine. But kind of, to this point of body kindness, I love that title. You should be kind to it. And there's lots of creators out there that push that message. One of them is on here, Katie, but if you guys don't know her, she's awesome. These are all handles of folks that I follow. And I think are, some of them are bigger than others. Some of them have bigger followings than others, but these are all kind of certainly places to start. And Keto Ken is like his name, his handle put me off for a minute, but he's actually really, really awesome. He had bariatric surgery and kind of logs his progress, but he has an awesome podcast too. And don't be thrown by the name Keto. Because I did judge it. I was like, Keto, I don't know how I feel about this, but he doesn't push keto at all. Books, Anti-Diet by Christy Harris and Body Respect by Linda Bacon. And then new recommendation for Jackie is Body Kindness. I think that would be an awesome book as well. Podcast, Nourishing Women Love them. This Nourishing Minds Nutrition up at the top, and Nourishing Women is the same people. Maintenance Phase, oh my God, I can't even say enough awesome things about Maintenance Phase. They are very New York and they cuss a lot. So if that is like not something you're into, or like even if it's something you're into, but like you maybe don't want to play in the background when you have kids in the kitchen or something like that, just be aware there are a lot of F-bombs in that one. It may be better to listen to in the car with headphones, something like that. Unfuck Your Brain, in case you hadn't, and thought that also has a lot of cussing in it, but that is Cara Lowenthal, and she's more of like a mindset coach, but she talks about diet culture a lot. And then Thick Thighs Save Lives. I mean, can't say enough good things. Oh, another book that I guess I did not write on the slide, and I'm just now realizing, shoot, I lost it. I'll come back to it. I got distracted because Jackie told me about another book that I'm excited to read. I'll come back to it. There's another book. It'll probably like come to me at like 3 a.m. this morning. But other ways you can, kind of take charge of your health is like fire your fatphobic providers, right? So I think all too often we think of like doctors as the boss. It doesn't have to be just doctors, right? It can be nurse practitioners or whoever, but like you're the boss, right? Like you are the consumer. And like, even though maybe healthcare shouldn't be like a service-based industry, it is. So, your doctor is working for you. And if they're not treating you appropriately, bye. You don't have to pay your copay. You don't have to do any of the tests that they want. If they walk in and like you don't like it from the get-go, you'd be like, you know what? Thank you for your time. I'm out. You don't have to do anything. And like if you do not have to pay them. I think that's another big thing, is that like you do not owe money, to the same way that like, if you went to get your hair done and you did not like the way it came out, or you felt that the stylist didn't listen to you, you would complain, right? You would complain and be like, look, this wasn't what I wanted. I tried to communicate it, blah, blah, blah. And you would expect a refund or something like that. This is the same way. You're not to pay for services you don't feel as though you receive. Higher weight inclusive providers. So I will say that the good ones are out there. Who they are and where they are, like I wish we just had like a Facebook group of them, right? Like, and we could find them anywhere. But obviously I'm familiar with a lot of providers here in Kentucky. But that said, I would try as best you can to try to find influencers of some type that are somewhat local to you, and ask them, because they're going to know their area the best. It's not always going to be something that like they advertise on a website or anything like that, but they're there, and they will be kind of, there's options everywhere, especially now with like telehealth and things like that. Like there's lots of different options. You don't have to settle for less. So I think kind of, doing what you can to like seek out people in your local community who kind of preach the same message that I do. They may be a little bit harder to find, but I promise you that they're there. And then kind of ask them because I guarantee you they get asked all the time, and they've done the groundwork to find it. And then treat your first appointment like an interview, right? Honestly, any doctor, at least a primary care doctor worth their salt, should also treat it like an interview. They're trying to get to know you. They're trying to get to know your health history. They should be taking extra time with you. They should kind of work to understand what your needs are and how they as a provider can serve them best. And if they don't, then it's kind of you know what, I appreciate your time, but I just don't think that you're going to be the provider for me. Bye. And I've done that. I've done it on more than one occasion. Certainly with specialists, like by the time you're paying like those copay premiums of seeing, an orthopedic surgeon or an endocrinologist or anything like that, those people should be fucking listening to you. And you're there because it's not a simple matter, right? Like you're there because your primary care has decided this is not something I'm comfortable handling. Why don't we send you to a specialist? So they should be listening to you. And again, if they don't, find somebody who will. It's as simple as that. I'm the jerk. I'm a nightmare patient when I go into like new appointments, because like I start asking them all the questions just to kind of like see, one, for my own personal care, but then also like, who am I going to refer to you? So I had my gynecologist sweating over carb counting and fasting insulin, and she was like drawing diagrams and everything. I'm like, girl, you're good. I could just wanted to see how you would handle it. And she's like, oh man, it's like, I didn't think it was gonna be that complicated. I'm like, yeah, well, because she didn't know I was a dietitian, so it was fun, but she passed. And then, kind of lastly, just kind of change the way you talk to yourself and the way you allow others to talk to you. And I think it sounds so simple, right? But like, of course, it's not that simple. So I think, the way you regard yourself is very much kind of a template for how you allow others to speak to you as well. If you are constantly inundated with self-talk, and again, this is where, like, I know this like rationally, but I don't have a huge amount of expertise in terms of teaching you how to do it. This is where a therapist can be really, really helpful. But what I will say, and I think, most therapists would agree with this, is like kind of, how you speak to yourself. If you are somebody who is constantly talking down to yourself, constantly kind of having negative thoughts about your body, there's certain ways to change that. But what I will say is that the cumulative effect of that is that is the energy you allow others to meet you with as well. So, kind of doing whatever you need to do to have more positive conversations to yourself about yourself. It doesn't have to be about your body. It can be, about you as a human being, right? Like your weight in your body is honestly pretty uninteresting and is a pretty small part of who you are. But it gets so fixated on so often. So, kind of once you have mastered that piece of, okay, like, we're not going to talk shit about each other anymore, because I think that's just not helping us. Then it becomes a matter of kind of setting boundaries with families and friends about weight talk, right? So like, you may just be kind of innocently at a barbecue, like munching on some ribs, and then like next thing you hear is people talking about keto, and you're just like, either one, remove yourself from the conversation, or kind of say, you know what, I just don't want to talk about that. Like, let's talk about, I don't know, like butterflies or something else, right? Just like literally any other conversation. Um, and if it becomes kind of a pervasive issue, and around holidays is when this can kind of really come up, is just kind of, ask people not to speak about your weight. Ask people not to comment on your body. Ask people not to comment on what you're eating. There's 1,000 other things that you could talk about. So kind of, focus on those things. And this is something that kind of, whoever you are, and it takes a little bit of courage to get to, I realize that, but calling out fat phobia. So like going to the doctor and just saying, even if it's a doctor that you like and you trust, and they're like, well, I think that your night sweats are because you are overweight, and be like, okay, where is the data for that? Right? They should be any statements that they're making off the cuff like that, they should also have data to back it up. Or just say, look, I don't want to talk about my weight. I want you to give me a reason other than my weight that could cause this, right? And if you notice that, people are, in some way ruder, you're in line in Starbucks and you hear somebody like scoffing at a drink order that someone in a larger body has placed, you'd be like, yo, that's not cool. Like, what's your problem? Right? Not all of us are going to want to be that confrontational, or not all of us are going to be that confrontational all the time, but it basically takes calling it out when you see it. I certainly do, but that's what I've built a platform off of. And I do come under a fair amount of heat for it. I won't say it's not without consequences, but in the ways that you are comfortable with in your life, calling it out. And also, like, if somebody hurts your feelings, tell them, right? Like, a lot of times, like I said, this diet culture is so pervasive that frankly, a lot of people don't recognize it as harmful. And certainly lots of people do, and they capitalize on it. But to that end, I think there is a lot of opportunity to actually educate people about this, and kind of like, hey, that thing that you said, like, you probably didn't mean it this way, but this is how it felt to me, right? When you made a comment about how much mac and cheese I ate with my ribs, like, it made me feel a certain kind of way. Again, you're not going to have that conversation with everybody. You may not have that conversation every time, but I do think that there's a certain level of learning and understanding that can come from those types of dialogues when they are had with the right people. And I mean, think about how you would feel if, like, a friend came to you and said, hey, like, that thing you said that hurt my feelings. Like, you would probably just, okay, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to, like, let me try to understand your perspective a little bit better. I think that diet culture and the way diet culture impacts us, I think it does require a certain level of openness to kind of unpack it. Um, and then last but certainly not least, you are worthy, right? I don't care what your body looks like. I don't care what it has been through. It is worthy of respect and love. And so are you. Like I said, your body is the least interesting thing about you. So you are a whole ass person outside of the body you currently reside in. So please don't ever forget that, because diet culture will tell you the opposite. There's a slide I thought I had earlier. So wrapping up in the next 72 hours. So I will open this here in just a minute. But basically you will be able to register for a free 30-minute consult, courtesy of me, just to thank you for being here. It's on my website, and the link is there. If you're not already following me on social media, follow me. I would love to have you. I'd love to hear your input, your ideas. Let's continue these types of dialogues. And then, of course, any questions. So I will, my input, you rock. Thanks, Katie. I appreciate it. So any questions, anything that you guys want to kind of talk about more, I'm going to turn off the slide sharing, but certainly welcome any feedback, any thoughts, any concerns. You can type them in the chat. You can unmute yourself. Oh, it is so much better this time. We're right at an hour. If you haven't been on my webinars before, I have a tendency of talking for like 2 hours. So the fact that I nailed it in an hour, I realize we're still going to go a little bit over if anybody has questions or anything like that. But hey, it's progress, right? It is still. Kate says, thank you for talking about the different kinds of restriction. I don't think people hear enough about that. Yeah, the anticipatory restriction, emotional restriction, compensation. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, they have a lot of different names. I thought about getting kind of technical with the names, but I think honestly, a lot of that is somewhat subjective depending on the source. But yeah, exactly. Restriction isn't, I think when people think about restriction, we think of it as just basically starving yourself, and it's not necessarily all it is, for sure. Oh, and Jackie, sorry, I'm just now seeing your comment that you should listen to, I'm assuming you're talking about the cussing podcast on your way home at Blend Right In. Yeah, for sure. Definitely. Yeah, and honestly, I like it about that because like just they're just so animated, and it's awesome. So I love that. Awesome. All right, Julie, well, you take care of yourself. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate your time. All right, so I'm not seeing a ton of questions, that's great. That means that we covered a lot. Again, I'll definitely send everybody a replay. If you are here live, you'll get an invite link, but you can go to my website and sign up for that free consult if you want it. You'll also get a free copy of the 2022 planning guide if you don't already have one. Yeah, and of course, this is always an open discussion. I hope you guys found this useful and valuable. Any ideas for other topics, like by all means, let me know. I think the people who are on here right now actually usually give me more topics, which is great. But anybody listening on their replay, I am an open book. So if there's things that like you've heard, or even things that I said and you're like, I'm not quite sure what she means by that, or I don't know where she's getting that, let me know. I'm happy to explain it further. If you're confused, I'm sure there's somebody else that is too. So that means I just didn't explain it clearly. Which is fine. Well, all right, I will actually end. Look at me, 5 minutes late, killing it today on this 5 Sunday. I will be live next week. I'm not sure what day. I'm kind of trying to survive the weekend first, and then we'll go from there. But I will see you all on. I will see you all on a live. I will. Oh, I always post it as like an event before I go live, so be on the lookout for that. Otherwise, we will have another webinar next month. It'll be whatever the second Sunday is. I want to say it's the 15th. But yeah, otherwise it's great to see everybody. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your Sunday. Stay warm if it's cold where you are. Send up a little prayer for the Bengals, because that will directly impact my week for the next couple of weeks. Yeah, otherwise have a great rest of your Sunday, and I will see you next month. Bye.